What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter for cleveland.com, and Jimmy Watkins, columnist for cleveland.com. These guys got all the analysis from today's Game 4 loss for the Cavs, 112-89, and this is another horrible loss for the Cavs. And Chris, I want to talk to you because you're in Orlando, and I want to get the initial and immediate reaction from the guys in the locker room and what's going on over there.
Yeah, I don't want to characterize it, Ethan and Jimmy, as panic or anything along those lines, but it's clear that the Cavs feel like it is now time to start looking at things other than just simple execution. This is a point in the series where it's 2-2, best of three games remaining, 2 of those at home in Cleveland, which gives the team a little bit of comfort. But players are talking about adjustments being made. JB Bickerstaff said that everything is on the table at this point. Essentially, everything is on the table at this point. And I think there's a belief that if the Cavs are going to win this series against Orlando, this offense has to find its identity from the regular season, which seems lost at this point in time. And now the thing that we have seen is that series can change very, very quickly. Series can change based on location. The Magic looked like one team in Cleveland. They looked like a different team in Orlando. The Cavs looked like one team in Cleveland, looked like a completely different team in Orlando. But there's only so much that they can do on the defensive end of the floor. The offense is such a problem right now that it's having a trickle-down effect to everything that they're trying to do. It's also having a trickle-down effect on their defense and Orlando's offense, if we're being honest about it. So I would expect, I don't know what the changes are going to be. We can discuss those as this podcast continues to go, the things that they should be talking about. But I would expect something to change going into Game 5. And if it's not rotational, if it's not a lineup change, it would be a schematic adjustment that the Cavs try to make.
Yeah, and I want to let Jimmy get into his perspective from this game, but I want to just rattle off some stats first to give him some different angles to go to, because like Chris said, there's a bunch of different things that we can look at, but here are a couple different things. Donovan Mitchell had 18 points in the first half. He scored 0 points in the second half of Game 4. He scored just 13 points in all of Game 3. The Cavaliers have scored 100 points in just one game in their last 9 playoff contests, including this one, going back to 2023. Over the last 2 games in Orlando, the Cavaliers have been outscored 72-26 in the third quarter. Also, in the second half of today's Game 4, the Cavaliers had just 7 points coming from Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, and Evan Mobley. Not to mention that the three-point shooting has been abysmal, and Max Strus and Georges Niang are a combined 4 of 28, which is 14.3% from three-point range over games 1 through 4. So, it is a lot to look at, and not to mention Darius Garland has been a negative 49 in his last 63 minutes, and Donovan Mitchell is a negative 40. Plus, Isaac Okoro in Game 3 and 4 has played 37 minutes, 0 points, and only 2 rebounds and 3 assists. So, a lot to look at. But Jimmy, where does your mind go for this series in this game? How does that affect your mindset?
It's the offense for me, Ethan. I mean, as different as the Cavs have looked in Orlando, this is not a new problem. The offense wasn't good at home either. The thing that would worry me if I were a Cavs fan is, like, has Orlando just figured out how to use the Cavs' offensive woes against them better at home? You know, the way some of these Cavs possessions are spawning Orlando's transition game, I mean, like Chris said, the Cavs can only play so much defense, which is crazy because that's what we were saying about Orlando after the second game. It's just crazy how much this series has flipped. I watched all the press conferences, so I want to piggyback off the point that he was making about something bigger has to happen here. Phrase that kept coming up in the post-game presser, I believe Darius and JB brought it up unprompted, was that the team needs to come together. And that can mean a lot of different things. It's never good when basketball teams start talking about we need to come together. It can mean it could be as simple as we're a little ISO heavy on offense, but reading between the lines here and in the context of some of the questions that were asked, it just seems like the Cavs are using that as sort of like a buzzword phrase to slap onto they are not handling Orlando's energy very well. I mean, they started great today. They played really well in the first half. But the thing that worries me is that it kind of seems like they went into halftime like, okay, we did it. We brought the energy. And then come to find out, there's actually another burst you have to bring to start that second half. And I think that third quarter was 72-26 that Ethan read. That's the most damning stat to me. That's when adjustments are made on the fly. That's when third quarters, like the best teams, like you know who's great in third quarters? The Denver Nuggets. You know who are great in third quarters? The peak Golden State Warriors, right? That's what great teams do. And the Cavs are just so far from that right now. Chris, I want to ask you, what do you think? What are they talking about when they're saying they need to come together?
I think the sense that I got in listening to them, and I talked to a few players off to the side about this, because that to me was a comment that stood out. And Darius addressed it, Donovan addressed it as well. And the way that they phrased it, and this was the feedback that I got from other guys that I talked to as well, is that when Orlando started making their run, Cavs individual players started trying to do it on their own. There were multiple possessions early in the third quarter where Evan Mobley was getting crucified by JB Bickerstaff, shouted at specifically. And look, JB is a loud guy. He can be crazy on the sidelines. He goes nuts on officials. But he went at Evan Mobley in a way that I can't remember a time JB doing that to any other player, including Evan. But it's because Evan gambled for a steal and he missed and he allowed Paolo to get a layup. It's because Evan was in the post working one-on-one when the Cavs were trying to run their offense. Evan went to like a turnaround jump hook with his left hand that had very minimal chance of being successful. It just felt like when Orlando was starting to make their run, when they were putting pressure on the Cavs, individual players were trying to do different things outside of the scheme. That was the sense that I got. That, to me, is what they were talking about when it came to not doing it together. Because you did see that. You saw evidence of that. You know, Donovan at times was trying to go one-on-one. Darius at times was putting on a dribbling clinic and trying to go one-on-one. And it was all happening as Orlando was putting pressure on the Cavs. And when teams put pressure on you and they start to make you uncomfortable and they start to go on a run, there's like a natural human element of, I got to do something to fix this. What can I do to fix this? But it felt like the guys were going outside the scheme and going away from some of the stuff that was working in the first half. And it really sabotaged them. And it helped fuel Orlando's run.
I think both sides of that interaction really speak to the weight of this moment. That the fact that Evan and some of these other players are going outside of themselves, that speaks to how much weight they feel when these runs are happening. And then JB's reaction, like the fact that you say he doesn't do that. The Cavs are feeling the weight of the moment right now. And it kind of, again, as we said a ton on the last podcast, it's one game, it's two games. The Cavs still have home court advantage. Like if you told me at the start of the series it'd be 2-2, Cavs have 2 of the last 3 at home, I'd still feel okay about my Cavs in 6 pick. But when you have players going outside of the scheme and outside of themselves, and you have a coach reacting in a way he doesn't usually react to things, that to me are signs of a team that the moment is overwhelming them a little bit right now.
And that was my big takeaway from today's game. And I think, guys, that was my biggest disappointment. Look, I asked every single person that I talked to following the game, what was the most troubling aspect of today's loss? And I was curious how each one was going to respond, because not everybody views a game the same kind of way. One guy may say rebounding, one guy may say offense, one guy may say not enough three-point shots. So I was just curious how each player was going to respond to that particular question. And for me, the most troubling aspect was that the Cavs showed a lack of postseason maturity. The kind of maturity, the kind of know-how that's required on this particular stage. The kind of composure and poise that we credited them for in games 1 and 2, right? When things were starting to happen in the first 2 games of this series, the Cavs had a response for every run that Orlando made. They showed a level of maturity. They showed a level of evolution. It looked like a team that had learned lessons from last year's playoff series against the New York Knicks. Today on the road, when things started to go the wrong way for the Cavs, and Orlando came out of the locker room with a whole bunch of energy, a whole bunch of defensive intensity, forcing turnovers, Franz Wagner just taking over the game, going at every individual defender that was in front of him, the Cavs completely crumbled. It looked like a team that was panicking. It looked like a team that was very, very uncomfortable. It looked like a team that was rattled, if we're being perfectly honest. And when Darius Garland and Jalen Suggs got into it around the 7-minute mark of the third quarter, it was a 1-point game. Magic, they had made their run, but they were up by 1. JB Bickerstaff called timeout. He wanted to regroup. He wanted the team to come together. And Darius Garland and Jalen Suggs are chest to chest, face to face, nose to nose. And when Jalen Suggs went back to the bench, he said to a bunch of his teammates, "What did I tell you? What did I tell you? What did I tell you?" Like, he sensed something from the Cavs that they were about to teeter, that they were about to fracture. And that's exactly what happened. He was the final person that kind of like pushed them over the edge. And it seems like all of the Orlando antics are kind of getting to the Cavs. They're not responding to them the way that you would want them to. And I just thought today's game on the road in a hostile environment with their franchise player, Donovan Mitchell, being an effective no-show in the second half, the Cavs looked shaken, and they looked like a team that didn't learn what we wanted them to learn, the collective we, what we wanted them to learn from the series against the Knicks. That was a very immature performance by the Cavs in the second half. Lost their poise, lost their composure, lost the game in a blink.
Thinking about the Cavs being up by 9 at halftime and having scored 37 points in that second quarter, and then for the remainder of the game only scoring 29 and coming out and scoring 10 points in that third quarter is ridiculous. When I'm thinking about everything that has gone on through this season for the Cavs, when Evan Mobley and Darius Garland went hurt and Donovan Mitchell was leading this team, and every given night it felt like somebody was stepping up, and you look at the bench roll today and they only ended the game with 15 points off the bench. That's staggering to me, one. And two, it really does feel like the Magic are the Cavs, not only from earlier this season when anybody else on their team can step up and pick up the pieces, like when they're trying to implement toughness and show that they are not this young team that can be taken lightly. The Orlando Magic had Paolo Banchero go off in Game 3. Now they had Franz Wagner go off in Game 4. And it feels like it can teeter-totter between those two, plus the role players that they had around them, and Markelle Fultz, who we talked trash about in Game 2 because of how poorly he played on the defensive end and how they were able to isolate him when Jalen Suggs went out, and then thinking about how Mo Wagner and his antics and getting the crowd involved and drawing fouls and pushing people around and all of those different things. It just feels like this Cavs team is starting to hit a decline right when they should be trying to show that they are a different team from last year. And at this point, I don't know which series would be worse from this year and last year, for the Cavs to go up 2-0 and lose the series, or if they just got their butts kicked in last year's series. And that's the thing that worries me about what could happen for this Cavs team mentality if they don't bring it together for Game 5 in Cleveland. Because we know that the Cavs want to protect home court. We know that they struggle on the road in Orlando. So basically, it's a do-or-die game in Cleveland for Game 5. And I want to get back into, Jimmy, your thoughts on how this team needs to rally around each other, what rotations might change, who you might want to see more of. Like, we saw Sam Merrill, Marcus Morris Sr., and Tristan Thompson at the end of the game. Should some of those guys be getting more minutes?
I guess, man. I don't know. Like, if you want to make an argument for Sam, get more space out there with Sam Merrill in small doses, fine. If you want to make an argument that Marcus Morris should be playing a little bit more over George Niang because the George Niang defensive renaissance has been a little bit maybe overstated now that we've watched Franz Wagner put him on the ground with a spin move. And I saw Tristan was really getting after Niang after that Jonathan Isaac putback dunk at the end of the third quarter. Like, maybe you can make that argument, I guess. But really what this comes down to is like, hey, are you guys built for this? We can make all the schematic adjustments you want. But do you have, like, can you guys handle the swings of the playoffs? Because these last 2 games, the answer seems like capital N, capital O, no. And I don't really even care what they have to say about it at this point. They've spent a lot of time talking about how they've grown from last year. I really didn't like Darius's quote today after the game when he said
They're not doing anything special.
that they're not doing anything special. I wrote down part of it. Just come together. That's all we have to do. And it was like a real dismissive, that's all we have to do. We've been here before. We've had this experience before. So just watch the film and be better. Dude, you played 5 games in the playoffs last year and you got skunked. What have you been before? What experience? You have had this experience before of being punked. You didn't bounce back from it. I hate that. That just sounds, particularly if I'm a Cavs fan, that just sounds so tone deaf to me. Like you don't understand. Actually, you're saying you understand, but you don't understand. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know your question is about adjustments. We can maybe talk a little bit more about adjustments right now. I just think it's a spiritual adjustment that needs to happen. And maybe that's as simple as playing at home and on the road. It shouldn't be that big of a difference. Maybe that's what it is.
So I think adjustments has turned into a cliche in the general discourse, right? At the same time, I do think that the Magic made a really, really good one. 2 really good ones, actually. The first one that they did was put Wendell Carter Jr. into the starting lineup instead of Jonathan Isaac. The next one that they did was Jalen Suggs on Donovan Mitchell. Okay, the Carter one was big, and you can look at his box score and whatever. I don't think that tells the true impact. It was big from multiple standpoints. Number one, he's 260 pounds. Jonathan Isaac is 230 pounds. Okay, so a physical advantage that the Cavs had gained in the first 2 games of the series disappeared. Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley could no longer physically dominate the Magic front court the same kind of way because Jonathan Isaac is not a center. He's a power forward. So the Cavs had a matchup advantage in the first 2 games, and they had a physical advantage in the first 2 games, and they took advantage of that. Offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, block shots, anchoring the paint, all that kind of stuff. The second thing that it did is it moved Jonathan Isaac out of the 5 spot into the 4 spot, where he can be the weak side defender. He is an elite defender. He is one of the best defenders in the entire NBA. Statistically, there are metrics that point to him being in the 99th percentile of different things. So now he's back in the role and in the position where he's most comfortable, where he's most effective. Weak side defender. You saw that impact in the last 2 games.
He's also making step back threes now.
Yeah, it puts him on the bench where he's playing against like George Niang and he's playing against Isaac Okoro and he's playing against these other guys that he can better take advantage of. And you're right, he's starting to make these outside shots that he missed in the first few games of the series, and he has shown an ability to space the floor. So that is a tactical adjustment that has worked. That is a lineup adjustment. That's a rotational adjustment that has worked. The Jalen Suggs thing, that's worked too. So I'm going to ask you guys, like, what is the lineup adjustment for JB Bickerstaff that he can make that can have the same kind of effect or a similar effect, if there is one that you believe, that Wendell Carter Jr. going into the starting lineup for Jonathan Isaac has had? You tell me.
I think it starts with just also figuring out what's being thrown at them. Like, if the Cavs keep seeing blitzes from the Orlando Magic or Donovan Mitchell, I think we talked about it in the last couple of podcasts, being able to have players on the court at the same time that can space the floor, whether that's Sam Merrill and Max Strus, or Max Strus and George Niang, or Max Strus and Marcus Morris Sr., depending on the defensive matchup. Those different options thrown at you when you have blitzes and things like that.
I totally get where you're going with this. I do. But listen to what you're saying, right? You're talking about Marcus Morris Sr., who has barely played in this series, and you're talking about Max Strus. And Max Strus has been one of the Cavs' least effective players in this series. Like, isn't the best adjustment these guys playing to their level? Like Max Strus playing like Max Strus, impacting a game like Max Strus. George Niang giving something off the bench. Karis LeVert playing like a guy who believed he should have been in the running for 6th Man of the Year. We can talk about all these different adjustments. We can talk about these lineups and these rotations and maybe try Tristan Thompson, maybe try Sam Merrill, maybe try Marcus Morris Sr. But if these Cavs players that the Cavs have counted on all season long and in the first 2 games of the series aren't going to play to their standard, aren't going to play to their level, then what are the Cavs supposed to do about that? Like, how does that get fixed? I don't know.
I'm trying to put myself in JB's head here. He's a defensive-minded coach, so he would make defensive-minded adjustments, right? If Max Strus is just going to come out here and keep putting out these Tony Snell stat lines, it's worth trying more of Isaac Okoro, right? Because that's a guy that you can put on Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero with more confidence/hope that he can slow them down and prevent them from having one of these supernova games that each of them have had respectively in the last 2 games. But I think Chris is right that the best adjustment sometimes is play better, even though it's annoying when coaches say that to us sometimes. And, like, the Cavs are the big dog here. If you do something that disrupts your identity as a team this late in the series, I think that only feeds into the idea that Orlando already believes, which is that they've knocked you off your game. And that could be a powerful thing mentality-wise. So, like, yeah, man, I think you just got, like, what you know, it's theoretical at this point, but, like, you know that what you do works. You just have to do it better.
I think we're talking a lot about talking about things, and I think the execution is what has been lacking this entire series for everybody on the Cavs, to be frank. And I think Donovan Mitchell's at the forefront of that. He's talked about, I got to be better. I got to do this. It starts with me. And other than in Game 3, he started every game pretty well. But in Game 4, he went away in the entire third and fourth quarter. So just what does it take for a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who is the star player, the franchise player, the player that could potentially change everything the Cavs have going on in 2 seasons when his contract ends, or next year if the Cavs decide to trade him because he doesn't seem happy with how the franchise deals with playoffs. What do you need from him when he's not being successful? Because I know we've talked about Donovan Mitchell is on every given night supposed to be the best player on the floor, but right now he doesn't even look like the best player on the Cavs, to be fair. Jared Allen does.
Well, that's a problem. Like, it's not something where you say, however you want to qualify it when it comes to Donovan. Nuh-uh. Nope. This is the playoffs. This is not the Knicks. This is the Magic. Okay? This is where you need to show why you're one of the best players in the NBA. If you want to be one of the best players in the NBA, if you want to be regarded as such, you got to do it here, now, on this stage, on the road when your team needs you the most. It's not about trying to impact the game in a variety of different ways. Like, yeah, of course it is. But this team needs Donovan Mitchell to score the basketball. That's how they're constructed. And especially when somebody like Karis LeVert is struggling and George Niang can't hit anything and Max Strus is basically MIA on the offensive end of the floor, this is where Donovan Mitchell needs to grab the game by the balls and be Donovan freaking Mitchell. And if he's not, okay? If he's not, then he's going to get the criticism. And he deserves that level of criticism because there is a star standard that we hold other stars to. And we need to hold Donovan Mitchell to the same one. He cannot be 5 of 14 and 1 of 4 from three-point range and score 18 points in a Game 4 that the Cavs absolutely needed to get, in a game that was there for their taking going into the second half. He can't take 4 shots in the second half. He can't miss every shot he takes in the second half. He cannot go scoreless in the second half of a game where things are starting to teeter, where the Cavs offense was completely malfunctioning. Like, he needs to save that. And I think we can say this. JB Bickerstaff as a coach needs to do a better job of making things easier on the team offensively. JB Bickerstaff as a coach needs to do a better job of finding a way to create more quality three-point looks. 17 for this team that averages about 37 in the regular season. That's not good enough. So we can say that JB needs to try and make it easier on Donovan and easier on this offense, and he needs to put his guys in a better position to be successful. That's fine. That's all fair. We can all admit that. Jamal Mosley has done a better job at that in the last 2 games than JB has in the last 2 games. But Donovan Mitchell got to play better. Period, point blank. Why did most people pick the Cavs to win the series last year against the Knicks? The people that did pick the Cavs, it's because they felt like Donovan was going to be the best player in that series, that he was the trump card for the Cavs. Got outplayed by Brunson. Why did people pick the Cavs? In part to win this series against the Magic, because there was a belief that the Cavs going into the series had the best player, and it was Donovan, and that was their trump card. But in the last 2 games on the road, Banchero outplayed him in game 3, and Franz outplayed him today in game 4. If the Cavs are going to have a consistent fighting chance to win this series, Donovan needs to be the best player again. Donovan needs to be better than what he was today and what he was in game 3. And there are certainly circumstances tied into his struggles. But not this time of year.
Two things before Jimmy hops in, because I definitely want to get his perspective as well. I know we talked about when Donovan Mitchell is not playing as well as a scorer, that he needs to pass the ball and be able to facilitate and get his other teammates involved. Yes, Chris is absolutely right. He needs to score the ball. But if he is trying to facilitate, he can't also have 6 turnovers with 6 assists. Like, that's not allowed. That's not even close to being good enough. And also, he's being outscored by Franz Wagner for the entire series now. So he's being outplayed by Franz Wagner, not just in game 4, but in this entire series, to be frank. So, Jimmy, I want to get your perspective on everything, and we're definitely going to get into more on JB Bickerstaff as this podcast progresses.
That Franz Wagner stat took me out, man. Wow. Outscored for the series, man. This is not, no duh, Donovan should be the best player in this series. That should be like the bare minimum. You're playing against a bunch of children, essentially. The Magic are all making their playoff debut. At least the guys who are the major contributors, right? And it's not even just the star standard. We should be holding him to that. But what did he tell you before the series, Chris? He wants to be the face of the league. He wants to be the face of the league. That's Kevin Durant era. That's LeBron James era. That's Steph Curry. That's these guys who are fading out. Look, there's a hole in the zenith now. Who's the next guy? Who's the next guy? Donovan wants to be that next guy. You know what those guys would be getting these kinds of questions for 30 points on bad efficiency. That's what a bad night is for a face of the league kind of guy. Donovan Mitchell, scoreless in the second half, 4 shots. Look, we should, again, there are circumstances at hand. The Magic have been guarding him more aggressively as the series progresses. His teammates aren't hitting shots. There's a lot going on here. But to Chris's point, the higher you aspire to climb in this league, the less you get the benefit of context. It really comes down to, did you get the job done? And I think that we have sort of, throughout his career, kind of had a misunderstanding of who Donovan Mitchell is in the playoffs. I've talked about this on the pod before. Donovan Mitchell has 2 playoff runs in his career where he has posted an effective field goal percentage over 50%. It's the bubble run with Utah in 1920 and the pseudo bubble run the next year, where I think we all, I don't know that we've done a ton of science on it, but we all kind of are it was, emptier arenas. There were some outlier shooting performances at large during the Paris. Anthony Davis was a 38% three-point shooter during the Lakers championship run. My guy has just never approached that percentage since then. Jamal Murray is a very good playoff basketball player. He wasn't putting up 50 every other night like he was during that series against Utah when him and Donovan had that classic series. Beyond that, he's been an underwhelming playoff performer in terms of scoring efficiency, which is his primary gift as a superstar. He's a scorer. As Chris said, that's what the Cavs brought him here to do. If it feels like some of the guys are looking at you right now, Donovan, and saying, save us, it's kind of your job, and you're not doing it. So we're going to let you hear about it.
So if we're talking about trying to make things easier on Donovan, this is where I think I start. And admittedly, this becomes complicated because of the opponent that the Cavs are playing against and how good they are defensively, how much size they have. And this is also complicated because of one of the guys that I'm about to suggest just hasn't been playing very well. But I think Donovan is still being limited by his knee issue. I think he's having a hard time dealing with Jalen Suggs and his constant activity, his constant physicality, his constant grabbing, his constant pressure. And I just think the Cavs need to help out Donovan. Create space for him that he can't create for himself, right? Give him a level of freedom on the offensive end that he just does not have right now. And to me, I think JB has to try going into Game 5. He has to try more Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus, Sam Merrill, 3-man combinations. Because if you have Max and you have Sam out there together, and it's weird because I feel like, and I don't have the numbers on this, I have to do the research on it, but it feels like in the games where Sam has played, it's been with Darius, not with Donovan. Again, I have to do the numbers on that. But if you put Sam and Max and Donovan together, and this means Darius on the bench for stretches, there's just a level of attention that Max Strus commands, and Sam Merrill commands too, just by reputation. just by skill set that I think could help out Donovan Mitchell. I think it could create more driving lanes for him to get all the way to the basket. I think it could take some pressure off of him on the offensive end of the floor. I think the majority of the eyeballs that are focused on him, some of those eyeballs have to go toward Max, they have to go toward Sam. And I do think if that starts to unlock Donovan and make things easier on him, guys in this locker room have talked about it a lot. They've talked about the Donovan Mitchell effect, guys. There is a level of swagger that this team plays with when Donovan is Donovan, right? There's a level of belief that comes with Donovan being Donovan. MVP candidate Donovan Mitchell. There's a trickle-down effect to everybody on the roster. When Donovan's not right, when Donovan's frustrated, when Donovan is not scoring, when he's not getting shot attempts, when he's not the engine of this offense, there's like an emotional letdown that is felt across the entire roster. And I think you see it every time Donovan has one of those off nights. He did in game 3, he did in game 4, and it just has a trickle-down effect on the rest of the roster. It's kind of like, oh bleep, we don't have him. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And if things become easier on Donovan and he has success, I think you are going to see the Cavs feed off of that. They feed off his energy. They feed off his positivity. They feed off his dominance. And I think playing him with Max and Sam, I think that helps lift Donovan up, and I think that helps lift the Cavs offense up. Now, look, you can't do that for extended stretches. We understand that because there are limitations that Sam and Max have together defensively. Like one of those guys is going to have to check Franz. But I think in short bursts, that could really give this offense a boost.
Right, and that's what I was trying to say earlier about the adjustments rotationally and having Max and Sam together. And yeah, you hit on it, just having the space and allowing them to just take eyes away from Donovan because of their shooting prowess will allow Donovan to do what he needs to and then uplift the team at the same time. But I think we should get to JB Bickerstaff to end this podcast. I feel like it's fair to say we knew that if JB Bickerstaff and the Cleveland Cavaliers did not get out of the first round, there was a good chance that JB Bickerstaff was going to lose his job this coming offseason. Now, looking at a 2-2 series lead, and I don't know if it matters whether or not they win the series, but if they don't win in Game 5 at home after everything they've seen, I think it could be really hard to talk about J.U. Bickerstaff returning to the staff next season. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Because that feels like a bigger picture issue.
So here's the thing that I think becomes difficult when it comes to the JB conversation. Because I do think there are adjustments that he needs to make, rotationally and schematically. Okay? And I do think that there are plenty of areas where he has come up short as a playoff tactician, including in the series against the Magic. JB's 0-8 on the road in his playoff series as a head coach. Think about that. That's first and foremost. But here's the thing that makes it difficult. JB's job is on the line. Think everybody knows that? Think JB knows that. I think when your job is on the line, you have to be convicted in the things that you do, right? You have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to your beliefs. And you have to believe it deep down that it's the right thing for your basketball team, okay? And the one thing that I like about JB is that he believes in this 8-man rotation. That is his thing. That has always been what has made him most comfortable. So if you're in a playoff chess match, you have to do what makes you most comfortable. You have to do what you think is best for the team. So on one hand, he has to have a level of conviction, the same level of conviction that he has had in these first 4 games. On the other hand, he has to be open to different ideas and different changes. But some of the changes that I think he would want to implement and some of the changes that I think the fans would want him to implement are made harder by a guy who's sitting in Cleveland nursing a knee injury and may not return in this series. And it doesn't mean that Dean Wade is the magic elixir and the Titanic sinks because Dean Wade's not there. Like, I'm not saying that. But, like, if you want to shoot more threes, Dean playing the power forward spot helps you do that. right? If you want to play quote unquote smaller lineups, quote unquote 4-out lineups, Dean Wade helps you do that. If you want to focus more on being a better rebounding team, Dean Wade helps you do that because he's a better rebounder than George Niang. Just ask Tristan Thompson from earlier today. Right? Like, if you want to do these various things when it comes to your rotation and your lineups and your style, you have to believe that you have the pieces to do those things. Right? And I'm not 100% convinced, and I don't know that JB is 100% convinced that he has the pieces to implement those stylistic changes that people are going to be calling for over the next couple of days. Does that make sense?
100%.
It does make sense. Here's what I'll say though. Dean Wade, I agree with you, Chris. He's like the this porridge is too hot, this porridge is too cold. This one's just right. Dean Wade lets you do both, right? He lets you do both. Dean Wade, if I take one of the bigs out for George Niang, does our defense suffer a little bit? Oh, if I put both the bigs on the court, does that hurt our space a little bit? Dean Wade, like Chris said, can answer both of those questions and make JB, and has done it long enough. That's the other thing. Has done it long enough where JB can feel confident in him. I just didn't think we'd be talking about this during the Magic series, man. I think that I viewed this as a Celtics issue, and from JB's perspective, again, to Chris's point, part of the Donovan thing's on Donovan, part of it's on the coaching. You can help your superstar in those situations. I just feel like if I'm JB, I'm like, this was working. This was working after the first two games. Then my team got on a plane, and I don't know what happened to it. Now, that's a pretty unconvincing argument. If you're talking to Kobe Altman, and that's what you're saying, well, I agree. Dean Wade can solve a lot of problems for this team. If I'm JB Bickerstaff, that's not what I'm trying to tell Kobe Altman. Hey, I don't have a lot of confidence in the rest of this roster. Buddy, I built the roster. What are you trying to say to me right now? What are you trying to say to me? I thought we had all we needed.
What do you think about them trying to go smaller? I'm curious on your thoughts.
I don't hate it. Orlando's offense is bad enough. Look, despite, I should say, I can't laugh at it anymore because they've scored 100 points in 2 straight games. I don't know what
first team in the series to
right.
score 100.
I don't know what the Orlando Magic probably have maybe even an above league average offensive rating, which is something that it is ingrained in the Orlando Magic's DNA to be bad at offense. So kudos to them. But right now, it is abundantly clear to me that the Cavs' bigger problem is offense. And I think Orlando will revert something closer, if not all the way to what they were in the first 2 games of this series when they were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the playoffs. But some of Orlando's offense is going to take care of itself. Markelle Fultz isn't going to score double-digit points probably in the road games in this series as he did in the last 2 home games. Jonathan Isaac isn't going to probably make step-back threes.
He's not making 4 threes.
Right.
No.
What is a step-back 3? I couldn't believe Jonathan Isaac made a step-back 3 today. Yeah, I think it's time to start. I know, like you said, when your back's against the wall, you got to ride on the horse you came in on to a certain extent. But your horse is limping, and it's not as fast as it looked at the beginning of the race. So maybe we have to switch up the way you're preparing the horse for the race, maybe a little bit. And because here's the thing, if an offensive adjustment works, really works, I don't know that the Magic can match it because even at their best, they are a limited offensive team. If you stick with defense, Orlando, that's where they want to live. They want to play a muck it up kind of game. And even though the Cavs were dominating the series after 2 games, they never trailed. It wasn't like this. It didn't look like this. So there's definitely room for some smaller lineups, put more shooters on the floor.
I mean, when we talked about the first 2 games, and we talked about how potent the Cavs defense was, holding them to 86 and 83. Now the Cavs have scored 89 and 83 over the last 2 games. And then they have allowed over 100 points in both games. So not only has the offense that we talked about being an issue continued to be an issue and now got stopped on the road basically, has now the defense also become an issue and been something that the Cavs have not been able to lean on as they did the entire regular season. And I want to end the podcast with this. You talked about J.B. Bickerstaff talking to Kobe Altman, and then there are now fans calling for Kobe Altman's removal. So there's a whole lot going on with the Cavs, And we have to see what happens in game 5.
I want to know, Ethan, from you if you think going small is viable.
I think it depends on who they have on the floor. If they run the Jonathan Isaac 5, they play small, then sure, playing small works. But I think if they go with Mo Wagner, Franz Wagner, and Paolo Banchero in a lineup, and you try to play small against that the Cavs have shown with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley on the floor that they haven't been able to stop that. I have doubts that the Cavs' small ball team would be able to match offensively what they would need to be giving up on the defensive end.
So I think that's a really good point. I think I think when the Magic goes small ball, it's not really as small ball. So, like, think about it from the Cavs' perspective, right? Let's say it's Donovan, Karras, Max, Isaac, and Jarrett. Like, that would be one of the variations of it. Or it could be Donovan, it could be Strus, it could be Sam Merrill, it could be Okoro, it could be Allen. Like, if you're talking about small ball, your 4 is either going to be Isaac, Karras, or Max?
That could be Niang if
Right.
he ever starts making shots, right?
That's not small.
Yeah.
That's their regular backup 4.
It's space ball. We're looking for space ball
Yeah,
here.
space ball, 4 out, whatever. But I didn't include Niang because everybody wants to see
Heard
him
that.
benched anyway.
Heard that.
So we're trying to figure out, like, solutions to fixing the theoretical problems that the fans have come up with. All right, so if you're talking about the Cavs using that kind of lineup, like, Jarrett Allen's the tallest one of that group. He's 6'9". That's what he's listed at, 6'9".
No
I think
chance.
he's more like 6'11". The rest of the players are all 6'5", 6'5" or under. So, like, to me, it's hard to go small ball against a team that can go small ball with 6'10" guys. like Franz is 6'10", right? Paulo is 6'10". You know, Gary Harris has more size than Donovan Mitchell. He's just as big as Isaac Okoro and Max Strus. Jalen Suggs has size on him. Joe Ingles is a tall dude. So it's like the Magic would just counter, and like their theoretical 4-man and their theoretical 3-man would still have an advantage. And they'd be quick enough and athletic enough to hang with the smaller guys from the Cavs out on the perimeter. So I'm with you, Ethan. Like, I'm not 100% sure how much the Cavs would gain in that theoretical setup, because I think the Magic can do small ball, space ball, whatever you want to call it, better than the Cavs can do small ball. I think the Cavs can do big ball a little bit better than the Magic can do big ball. If Jarrett and Evan are playing well together like they did in the first 2 games.
Yeah, and I really do think, I know you mentioned Dean Wade, and I don't want to harp on this because we don't know if he's going to be able to come back for this series or even the second round, whatever. But I miss that Jarrett Allen, Dean Wade, and Isaac Okoro lineup. Like, that lineup was like a death lineup defensively because it allowed Donovan Mitchell to get into the passing lane and not have to worry as much about his man because Isaac was going to get around screens and Dean Wade was going to come off and be the help defender and Jarrett Allen was literally just locking down the paint. So that felt like you had a 4-man defensive lineup and it didn't really matter who the 5th man was. Usually it was Max Strus just in those lineups being able to spread the floor on offense. But I mean, Dean Wade was somebody that at the beginning of the season, talking like second podcast that I did with Chris, I criticized and didn't know his value. And now it's like, where is Dean Wade where you need him because of what he impacts defensively, his spacing, his shooting, and all of that. But I think we have to wrap this podcast up just by getting an overview, and Jimmy alluded to it. Is this now a Game 7 series? Because the Cavs simply can't win in Orlando?
Is this how we're just going to wrap up every single podcast? Let's revisit our prediction. Now, does it go 6? Does it go 7? Jimmy, you can go ahead.
I mean, it kind of feels that way, man. Like, it's got that feeling of one of those first round series where just neither team can win on the road. I will say, like, the Cavs, I know they're talking tough, but my eyes are telling me on the court when Orlando makes a run that they've been punched again and they're kind of holding their stomach a little bit here. I think the strength of the home crowd and the whatever gets sapped out of Orlando's bench when they get on the plane to Tuesday should be enough to return to Rock Fight land and the Cavs take care of business at home. But like, man, the Cavs look worse on offense at times than Orlando did in Cleveland. Like, it's to the point. The reason we're having the space ball conversation is because the Cavs offense is so bad that their impenetrable defense is now giving up like 120 points to an offense that, again, we did not think was ever going to score 100 points, it looked like, in the series. So, like, my brain is kind of morphed here. I don't know what to think, which makes me close my eyes and point at the schedule and say, yeah, 7.
Players in the locker room, to your point, Jimmy, players in the locker room after this game were basically saying, without actually saying, JB, you need to do something to create more quality looks for us on the offensive end of the floor. You need to do something to get our 3-point attempts up higher. You need to do something that is going to make it so that offense is not a chore on us. Like, that's basically what the players were saying, without actually saying JB's name, without actually calling him out. But it's clear that the Cavs believe that moving forward in this series, they got to take more threes. Orlando did when they got home, right? Orlando was just like, we didn't shoot well in Cleveland. We're just going to double down. We're just going to keep firing. And what happened? Jalen Suggs started making threes. Jonathan Isaac started making threes. Some unlikely, Paolo made 4 in game 3. Some unlikely sources started to make those shots. And look, like, Orlando's not hoisting like they're the Golden State Warriors here. They took 26 today. But for the Cavs, the three-pointer is such a weapon for this team, and it has been throughout the course of the season. And that was supposed to be a clear difference based on the personnel that was added in the offseason. Because they learned in that Knicks series, we don't have enough shooting. We don't have enough spacing. We don't take enough threes. Now the personnel is different from that Knicks series, and they've got to find a way to make that number go up and just, like, threaten the Magic with that. And I don't know what the answer for that is. Again, I gave some theories on that. But if there's something for JB Bickerstaff and his coaching staff to figure out over these next couple of games, that to me, I think, is the most glaring one. Beyond the fact of Donovan needs to play at his MVP level, Max Strus needs to give something more than what he's giving. The bench can't be thoroughly dominated the way that it has in the last 2 games. So beyond the fact of play better, these guys need to play to their own standard, get to a level that they didn't show in Orlando. They've got to take more than 17 threes in a game. 17 threes in a basketball game for a team that's constructed like this is just outrageous, to borrow a Donovan Mitchell term.
Real quick on that. I think it's so important that Chris brought up that the players are talking, like the players are in the best way they can sending a message to JB, hey man, we need to get more threes up. Our offense needs to be better. That's important schematically, of course, because you can't be feeding Orlando's offense with your own crummy offense, right? Like, make them play against a set defense. That's what you want to do. At the same time, psychologically, man, like, when you can't score, it bleeds. Like they always say, don't let that offense bleed over your defense. Well, guess what? It does. It does. That just happens, especially for players who derive their whole identity as a basketball player from their offense. That's human nature. So I think that's worth highlighting just because, like, that tells you, like, these guys it's mentally straining to struggle to score. Being bad on defense is mentally draining in a different way. It's, like, embarrassing, but you can point to, like, okay, we just didn't try hard enough. They're trying really hard to score, and they can't do it.
Oh.
And that's demoralizing.
29 points in the second half of a basketball game. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what are we, in the 50s? Jesus.
Yeah, I thought we were done with the 50s. Anyway, Chris, I don't want to let you get away without giving your answer for this question. Cavs in 6 or Cavs in 7? Are you sticking with your Cavs in 6?
Yeah, of course. There was a reason why I believed this was not going to be a sweep. There's a reason why I believed that this was going to be a competitive series. There's a reason why I still believe that the Cavs are going to win it. plenty of reasons for that. And if you're in the Cavs' shoes, you know you're better at home than they are at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, right? And you can't get comfortable saying, well, 2 of the next 3 are at home. But, like, if we're being honest, the Cavs do not have to win on the road to win this series. That's the benefit of home court advantage. It's on Orlando to go to Cleveland and show they can do this. They haven't yet. Maybe they do it in Game 5. We'll wait and see. I have my doubts.
I do think they win Game 5 at home. I think I'm changing my answer to Game 7 because I do not believe that they can win in Orlando. That's what they've shown me. I had believed coming into the series that they were going to win 1 game when they got there. I thought they were going to win Game 4 coming into the series. Before any game was played, I was like, they'll lose Game 3 and then readjust and win Game 4. Now that clearly didn't happen.
They were 9 points up at halftime. They were 24 minutes away from that being a reality, and then they set basketball back a century.
Yeah, so they don't give me any belief that they can win in Orlando at this very moment. So
I can understand thinking that.
So I'm going to switch to Game 7, and as my flaming hot take goes, if they lose Game 5, I think they lose the series because obviously they go back to Orlando.
No kidding. I think a lot of people would say the same thing.
We got time travel involved now. The Cavs have to travel 100 years plus the distance back for Orlando to Cleveland to win that game. That's a lot.
Oh my God. After this, yes. Maybe even more than that.
All right, guys. That'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. And I bet you Jimmy's going to be getting his takes off too. So to get all this information, analysis, injury updates, and just quotes on what the Cavs are saying going into Game 5 in Cleveland, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.